Good morning, California, from a rainy Netherlands, cold and rainy Netherlands studio in The Hague. I wish you a very warm welcome to our webinar this morning about zero emission acceleration. And my name is Ellen Heap. I'm a board member of the Dutch Electric Vehicle Drivers Association and very committed to this subject that you're going to talk about today. Because we in the Netherlands, we look very anxiously at what's happening in your region of the world. California and the Netherlands have had a very long and good relationship on working together on this theme. So it's important what you're doing, and the world is looking at what you're doing. So very nice to be part of that. What is the program for this morning? First, we're going to introduce you to Gia Vecine, and she's going to introduce you to the team of GO-Biz and talking about all the interesting things that you're doing to accelerate this zero-emission vehicle market, because it's important and it's one of the things that we need to take care of in those days. Tyson, who is the deputy director, he will introduce you to the ZEV market development and give you broader insight what's happening. And then we will finish off with a very interesting panel discussion with some of the excellent members of the GO-Biz team. It's an interactive program, so please feel free to make a comment or ask a question in the comment box on the right side of your screen. And then we will see that it comes back to the speakers. But let's maybe dive into discussion and let's travel around the world to California. Gia, good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
So, yeah, I was wondering, we are working hard here in the Netherlands to boost electric vehicles. And we're very happy to hear that at least sales are going well here in the Netherlands and in Europe of the electric vehicles. How's that situation in California at this moment?
It's going well. In fact, I just think that we calculated yesterday that through Q3 here in California, new sales of electric vehicles was 9% of the total. And so that's very promising, and we're seeing a lot of momentum moving in a lot of fronts. And we're really excited to be here today and to be able to talk about this strategy that we're putting together.
I think we're so curious to learn about all that. So I'm giving the floor to you, Gia, and from the Netherlands, I'm looking anxiously at everything that you have to explain to us. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Good morning, everyone. I just want to start by thanking you for being here with us today and give a special thank you to Ellen Hip and also Peter Van de Vetter, who is helping us to curate questions today and is part of our team, and to the Coast to Coast program, who has really helped to make this connection happen between California and the Netherlands. We're excited to be here, and we're looking forward to a great discussion and to hearing from you, those who are participating today. Ellen did a good job of giving an overview of what we're going to cover. So I think, we're going to hear from Tyson a little bit, and then we'll move into an open Q&A discussion with Tyson and the other members of the GO-Biz ZEV team. So remember, when we get to that point, or at any point really, you can use the chat box for your questions and comments, and we'll have some support to help go through those, and then we'll wrap up with our next steps. So With that, I think we'll move into the next segment. Many of you here on the line, if not all of you, know Tyson Eckerly. He leads our Zero Emission Vehicle Market Development Unit, which has grown in the last 7 years from one person, Tyson, being solely focused on light-duty hydrogen station permitting and infrastructure development, to 7 full and part-time staff, with a focus now on both the ZEV technologies from the light-duty to the heavy-duty classes, and broadening our focus to really anything that can help move the market needle, so to speak. So it's been exciting years, and we're going to hear from him and our team today. So let's jump right in. Good morning, Tyson.
Hi, Dia.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, great. I wanted to start kind of bigger picture before we get into your presentation, about why we need a ZEV market strategy.
I think really what it comes down to build need, it comes down to teamwork, and the strategy is really trying to put all the players in place and bring some transparency to what everybody's doing, so we can work together to get where we need to go in terms of getting to 100% zero emission transportation.
Great. And I know that you're going to get into some of the details in your presentation in a moment here, but maybe you could just highlight a couple of the key aspects of the strategy that you feel we want to just sort of emphasize here at the beginning. And as you're thinking about that, the strategy also puts a real spotlight on equity. So maybe you can say a little bit about why and how the document aims to accomplish this.
Yeah, so I think, really at the highest level, what we're trying to do is align all of us around a core set of principles and decision-making tools as we move forward. A lot of the value is having people who are closest to the problem making decisions, right? And so on the equity piece, that's the first principle we have in the plan, is there's equity in every decision. And you'll see in our tables, there's a lens with which we encourage everybody to look through to put equity first. And of course, there's more work to be done there. And I think we're looking for feedback from stakeholders. I know we're looking for feedback from stakeholders and how to improve that, to make sure that we're truly building a market that benefits all Californians. But I think just broadly speaking, we have the principles, we have the core objectives, but it's really organized around ushering in collective action, and then, through increased transparency.
Great, thank you. I have just one more question for you, and then we'll jump into your presentation. So this has been a big effort already, and the document has come a long way from its inception, and it keeps improving. But I want to know, what are you most proud of so far in this effort?
Yeah, so I think when we first started this process, we mapped all the different programs the state has throughout, and there's a lot of complexity potentially, right? And I think what we've done and what we tried to do, and stakeholders can be the judge of it, was to take that complexity and then make it simple and digestible. And I think that's the goal, right? And we want it to be something where you read and go, oh, that's obvious, but it certainly wasn't obvious at the start. So I think, proud of bringing it to this level, and hopefully stakeholders agree, but if not, we want to work with you to improve it.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Let's move to the presentation.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks, Gia. And so as we're pulling up the presentation, just want to give you, we're here for the kickoff event. We've sent out the document. Most of you, I would hope, have had a chance to open it by now and take at least a skim through it. What we want to do is use today to kind of guide your review, introduce some of the thinking behind it. If you go to the next slide here, we have a picture of the signing of the executive order, and that's really what kicked this into overdrive. Governor Gavin Newsom, on September 23rd, signed the executive order, which the three major components is 100% of new passenger car and truck sales in California would be zero emission by 2035. 100% of medium and heavy duty vehicles in the state would be zero emission by 2045 where feasible, and then 2035 for drayage trucks, and then 100% of zero emission or off-road vehicles and equipment would be zero emission by 2035. So it's a lot of work. That's a big ecosystem we're addressing. There's great work being done, at our various agencies. California Air Resources Board on regulations, is one of the big driving things to get that all together. But in that executive order, he called out GO-Biz along with our agency partners to develop this ZEV strategy. And we go to the next slide. And so what we're talking about is this: the ZEV strategy in the executive orders scheduled to be delivered by January 31st. So we're on a tight timeline. So that's why we've asked for review in short order. What we're talking about when we talk about a strategy is really there's two components. We'll kind of walk through those today. The first one is on the left here. It's the strategy document itself, and that's really designed to help set the direction. And we're asking for feedback by this Friday. Midnight is fine, or into the weekend if it has to be. That's okay. And then the second component, which is under development and we have not shared, is the ZEV strategy website, and that's really kind of where implementation lives. The kind of the more the day-to-day, month-to-month management of what we're doing as a collective to move forward. So we can go to the next slide here. And so, kind of what we wanted to give it some thoughts. What's the strategy behind this strategy, or what's the approach, right? And it's pretty simple, really. We want to organize everybody around, who's doing what, and then prioritize the actions, because there's a lot of stuff we can do. We want to try to avoid being, mile wide, inch deep, and really go deep in moving core market development issues forward. And then we implement, measure and learn, and then the cycle starts over again, right? It's kind of rinse, wash, repeat, keep learning and going forward, leveraging the document and the website as communication tools. We can go to the next slide. So what we've done, and this is a hand sketch, and I've had a lot of fun with the Microsoft Surface. That's not a commercial plug by any means, but it works really well. And so we've organized the document around 4 pillars. The 4 pillars of the market are vehicles, infrastructure, workforce, and the end user. And the core idea is that you need each of those to be developed in balance to succeed, for the market to succeed. If you have all the vehicles but not enough infrastructure, the market will sag. If we don't have the workforce available to build the infrastructure and the vehicles, the market will sag. And the same thing, we need the end user to be in a position to say yes to adopting zero emission vehicles. And so the strategy itself organizes kind of our inputs. What's the investment and time, who's doing what and how are they doing it, as it relates to each of these pillars. And there's a lot of cross-cutting actions as well. But really building that up from there to get the outcomes we're looking for, which is, air quality improvement, it's greenhouse gas reductions, it's clean mobility access, it's jobs. And, the ultimate goal, the overarching goal, is large scale, equitable, sustainable market development. And so the strategy is we're meant to pull all of this together. We go to the next slide. What we've done here is there's a monster table. This is called table 2 in the document. You'll see this is just the first 5 rows of the document. But what we've done is, organize the state agencies, the other partners like local governments, industry, federal government, and kind of, what is their role? Are they a lead role or support role with respect to each of these market development pillars? And you can see that there's some color coding and letter coding on that as well. So the idea is that a stakeholder can take a scan and see who's doing what. What we try to do is within each group, like within state agencies, designate 1 lead or maybe 2 leads on each pillar, and try to do the same thing for the stakeholder groups. What we'd love for you to do in your review is to take a look like at the ZEV connections and the equity connections. Do we have those right? Is there something we should change, especially for the group that you may represent? And if we go to the next slide, with the document then further digs into core objectives. So I'm using GO-Biz as an example. We try to keep the objectives, short and concise. What are we trying to accomplish in it, overall in this given year? And so we've also anchored these to those market development pillars. So the darker colors mean that, this is a direct impact, and then the lighter colors would be an indirect impact of each of these objectives. And this is still in the organization phase. And we go to the next slide. I think this was kind of a helpful exercise for us to go to. We have a lot of documents at the state that we do that are related to market development. This is, again, using GO-Biz as an example. I've taken out some of the text so it doesn't look so busy, but essentially we've identified, okay, what are the documents that are being developed where the agency is the lead agency? What documents do they have where they're the co-author and then or supporting agency? And then it's a little bit unique for us. We have a receiving agency, which is the agency action plans for the ZEV market development strategy. And we'll talk about those in just a moment. We can go to the next one. Finally, we have a bunch of tables about stakeholder roles, and I think we really want to make sure we get these right. We're not go into as much detail as we did with the state agencies, just because we don't control this as much. But I think it's really important to acknowledge and to get where we need to go. This is not something just state agencies can do. We really need to have this collective approach. And so I've just used fleets as an example, mainly because it fits on one slide. But you can see, we have the ZEV connection and then the core objectives and how they relate to the pillars. So please do take a look at that and make sure we have those right. If you go to the next slide. So now we're kind of getting into the, so the document has set the objectives. Now, in the prioritizing and implementation, this is kind of putting the strategy to work. And this is where, I think we have a lot more iteration to go. But so the idea is each agency will submit an action plan by March 1st. And this would be posted on the ZEV Strategy website. And so with each of the objectives that you saw in the table, there would be a set of actions, very brief, that describe exactly what the agency hopes to accomplish in that year. So I used GO-Biz as an example. In terms of the ZEV market development strategy, one of our actions will be to establish clear, agreed upon metrics that multiple stakeholders can use to diagnose the market. And then, so we'll have those collected and then posted on the website for everyone to see. Then layering on top of that, if we go to the next slide, talking about the pillar priorities, which is, focusing in, okay, what do we really need to do with respect to vehicles, with respect to infrastructure, to the workforce or the end user to really move the ball forward, so to speak. So these, similar to the agency action plans, this is kind of boiling everything up into the annual priorities that we need collective action on. So we would have a collective priority for each pillar, and then also one for cross-cutting issues. This is really to focus on issues that require multi-stakeholder engagement. So all the objectives that the agencies are working on, a lot of those will have multiple stakeholders pushing on their objectives and making sure they're going. But this is adding that other layer, bring it up to even more simplicity. Here are the 3 to 5 things we're really focusing on as a collective. And then we're targeting March 15th to publish these. That might be a little bit aggressive, but we also know we need to move fast. If we go to the next slide. And then finally, we're getting back to that measuring. So this is a table that we pulled from the document. It's a summary table, but essentially, we want to make sure we're taking a quick look, or a sustained look at the outcomes, like air quality, greenhouse gases, access to jobs and to mobility. But then also, deep dive into the pillars themselves. So the vehicles, infrastructure, end user, and workforce. And you'll see in the document, these are hot linked to, so if you click on vehicles, it'll take you down to a whole suite of policies that drive our actions at the state, reports that are related to it. And so it gets complex really fast. And so our objective is to boil that all up into something that we can, a stakeholder could take a look and diagnose the market in relative short order. Now, there's already a lot of great work that's being done at agencies. And so what we're trying to do is pull this all into one spot. So like, as an example, the Energy Commission has a really great data portal that goes through ZEV sales, ZEVs on the road, EV charging infrastructure, hydrogen infrastructure. So we want to make sure we're showcasing that through this portal. And then if we go to the next slide, so this, really what I want to do is targeting your review, right? So this is a document that we're putting out, but it's really for the collective. We want to make sure everybody has a piece in it. So the questions that we really want you to focus in on: do we represent your sector correctly? Are we missing any key objectives? Do you have ideas for improvement? This is going to be an iterative process. We know it's going to consistently improve, and that's our goal. So we're committed to working with stakeholders to make sure that everybody has a piece of this, and that they're feel clear about what they're doing. And so in terms of the specific way to give feedback, please send an email to our email address down there. And then, usually it'd be ideal actually to put the comments directly into a Word document. We find that works best on our end, but we'll take comments however you like to. And then finally, the last slide, I just want to end with a quote from Henry Ford, which I thought was appropriate given the moves they're making. There's a lot of great moves in the auto industry, but really, if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. And so that's what we're trying to do with the ZEV strategy, is get us all moving forward together. We know where we need to go, and then now it's really about the how. And so with that, I'll stop. And thank you very much for paying attention.
Great. Thanks, Tyson. Okay, well, before we begin the Q&A panel discussion, I have a couple of questions that I was hoping you could answer for us. Then we'll bring the team on to the screen with us. So in your presentation, you talked about the strategy document structure, and you mentioned that the agency action plans and the pillar priorities. Can you say a little bit more about how this strategy is different, and maybe how it dovetails with the previous ZEV action plans that GO-Biz has published?
Yeah, so I think that the ZEV action plans in the past really focused in on just the state agencies, and of course that's what we've had the most control on. But what we're trying to do is layer in the external stakeholders. And the other thing that we do is try to simplify it a little bit and really hone in on stuff that we can focus in as a collective. I think with the ZEV action plans, we get through time there's a lot of actions to keep track of, and I think it was really effective for the time. But now it's really about focusing our directive together. And then I think the last thing is really empowering the people who are closest to the problem to make decisions and help see. So what we do know is that we have blind spots. Those are quite obvious, right? And so we're relying on stakeholders and our collective community to help identify those blind spots so we can solve them and solve the problems together.
Great. Something you said there, and that is a great segue into my next question, which was around sort of how the previous action plan was appropriate at the time, and as we've moved, this is more appropriate now. So you said that the strategy is due January 31st to the governor's office, and in the executive order it directs GO-Biz to update the strategy every 3 years. Yeah. How do you see this process going? And really, in terms of thinking about how things are moving, how do we ensure that the strategy remains relevant as the market scales and sort of needs and priorities shift?
Yeah, that's great. So I think that 3 years would be a minimum in terms of the update. This is a living, not breathing, I guess, but living, breathing document that if we need to change an objective through time because we learned something, we're going to go in and change the objective and make sure that stakeholders are brought in and know about it. So I think we should set that, this document is mainly supposed to set the direction. Ideally, if we got it perfect, maybe it doesn't have to change in 3 years, and we're doing a lot of the implementation stuff that will change on an annual basis. But I think the main thing is we're committed to doing whatever it takes to get the market in position to meet the goals and exceed the goals that we have from Governor Newsom.
Great. And the last piece is a little bit more kind of nuts and bolts. So I was hoping that you could just reiterate to clarify for participants who are looking at the document and reviewing, reiterating what pieces will be in the plan, in the strategy document, versus sort of what we intend on having on the website. And then a second part to that is, feedback, if any, that we would want to have from stakeholders on, how to balance the complexity of the system with the simplicity of this approach, right? So if there's ways in which, and maybe I'm sort of answering the question as I'm asking it, but just saying a little bit more about, what we plan to put where, and then how we might guide stakeholders to help us make that better.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the document itself, it's a little bit stale, so that will be part of the website in a way. So that's kind of a cheating answer. But then that's just the direction, and then on the website itself, we'll have the action plans, the pillar priorities, probably communication between stakeholders, and then and then the metrics, right? The key. So every month or so, whatever makes sense in terms of updating, just making sure there's one central place where you can go and get to navigate to wherever you need to go within the state for the metrics. So I think that's kind of the main differentiating thing. And then I forgot the last part of your question, and I should have.
Oh, that's okay. Just are there sort of recommendations or specific asks?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So I think within what we're trying to do is we want everybody to be able to kind of chunk out pieces of the market, solve that problem, and put it back on the shelf in a working order, if that makes sense. And so ideally, if we did this right, you'll see the whole system in its complexity and how all the pieces fit together, so that we can then focus in on the core problem areas. And so, some of it's obvious, like permitting, for example. We're doing a lot of work on permitting. That's an obvious answer. It doesn't cost money necessarily. It just costs time. And so you know, that, but in the greater context, it has more meaning than just on its own.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm seeing a lot of comments coming through. So let's dive in and get the rest of our team here on the screen, and we can answer some questions from our participants today. Okay. And let's see. I see a couple of comments here, and let's see. So I see a comment here, so I'll just read this, and if anybody has a response to this. So equity to date has been focused solely on disadvantages, communities and low income, but has ignored the residents of rental properties not classified as low income. We can't get to 100% without it. Okay. Does anybody have any comments there? Or we can leave that there. Yeah, thank you. All right. So our first question here is, how will we incentivize collaboration? And I think that maybe Tyson, I'll ask you to answer that question, and then anybody please jump in if you have something more to add.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, to the apartment dwelling population, that is obviously an area that we're going to pay big attention on going forward. I think the California Energy Commission is lead on infrastructure. They're doing a bunch of thinking around that very problem, and so that is something we're definitely paying close attention to in terms of, and then looking at building standards to help that. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we can do, but that is obviously a core problem that we focus in on. And then in terms of incentivizing collaboration, I'm not quite sure how to, like, incentivizing wise, like what we found through time is this market is exciting in a lot of ways, and like we have no problem getting people excited to contribute. And I think the biggest challenge is making sure that we direct that energy in a way that we're all pulling forward together. And so that's our goal here. So I don't imagine much challenge with getting people excited. Now, it depends as we broaden out the scope, right? So we have to reach to fleets, for example, who may not have been paying attention to it. The ones who own 5 to 10 vehicles or less than that. There's a lot of thinking that needs to go around that. And I think it's this problem we're going to have to solve collectively.
Okay. So our next question here is up on the screen. That's really helpful. Thank you. So what other countries or markets have we looked to for inspiration, for learning and for potential inspiration? And maybe I'll just throw on the converse, that we've been working with that are gaining inspiration from us as well. And I think, again, Tyson, maybe you can start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of countries who are doing great work in zero emission vehicles. The Netherlands, obviously, who we're partnered with in this webinar. But we look to Germany, to Japan, to Korea. The risk here is naming those. There's obviously people or countries that we're forgetting. And so, but one of our great consortiums that we work with is the International ZEV Alliance. They do a great job of pulling together all the international parties so that we can learn from each other. But then, we have it's not just international, it's the states, it's the US Climate Alliance, it's, and so we're working, to both learn from, but then also share our lessons learned going forward. Ideally, anything that we do in California that we've learned from and made mistakes with, that, the other jurisdictions don't repeat those mistakes. And obviously I'm missing somebody, obvious in the list of countries. Well, it looks like Gia's internet connection maybe is slowed down a little bit. Maybe Gia, while that's coming back, just Kylan, you could talk about what the question that's on the screen.
Sure. Yeah. So
Okay.
So there's a question about permitting. So
I'm not sure if
Yeah.
my audio is coming through clearly, but I'll just keep going. What is being done?
Sure, Gia, I'll just jump in here and talk about permitting. So this fits within one of the priorities that we would have with GO-Biz, in our agents action, our action plan. So what we focus on is streamlining the permitting process for hydrogen refueling stations and for electric vehicle charging stations. So we have a law, AB 1236, which was passed in 2015, which stipulates every city and county needed to streamline the permitting processes for charging stations. So we've gone about the process of grading every city and county in California to see if they've streamlined, have they passed an ordinance, have they adopted a checklist, and we found that about 21% of jurisdictions have gone about that process. So many cities and counties still need to streamline. It's a wonderful opportunity to develop economic growth in this challenging time coming out of COVID. So we work with cities and counties to streamline and make it easier to get approval for a charging station. And an exciting initiative that we would include this year in our priorities at GO-Biz is what we call the Permitting Olympics. So this is this idea that by Earth Day 2021, every city and county will streamline their permitting procedures, and for charging stations. And if a city or county does, they would get a gold medal. They would get special recognition from our office. So a lot of the folks on our email list, hear about these things. So encourage you to sign up. And for any city and county that wants to be recognized as a permitting champ to get that gold medal, I would encourage you to reach out to our office.
Right. And then, so while we're waiting for Gia to come back, so Hannah, maybe you can take a stab at this one. And I know there's a lot of this is the Public Utilities Commission, so we'd want to make sure we're looping them in. But Hannah, I'll just read it real quick. What can we say that's being done about utility availability, utility power availability and transparency?
Yeah, thanks, Tyson, and thanks, Paul. I think that was who asked this question. We're working closely with our colleagues at the California Public Utilities Commission, as well as at the utilities in California, to understand what power is needed in order to support the level of electrification that we anticipate to reach the governor's targets in the new executive order. We collaborate with them very closely. There's the transportation electrification framework process that's going on right now at the Public Utilities Commission, which will be looking at the activities that need to happen to transition the transportation sector. As well, the California Energy Commission undergoes processes about every year, I think, or on a determined cycle to look at the energy forecast and needs. And so all of that sort of ties in what we have and what we need and decisions going forward. I can't give you an exact answer on what those numbers are, but we can certainly follow up with you on some of the actions there and how to get more information about that.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. And here's a question about the reliability and resiliency of hydrogen supply. Mike, Michael, I don't know if you want to jump in there, and I can round it out, or it looks like. Well, maybe we're having some challenges with Michael's connection also. I'll start then. How about that? Then, oh, maybe it's muted. Okay, so in terms of resiliency, so we've had some issues with hydrogen supply. This most recent one was a storm that impacted a facility in Louisiana, and part of the challenge is hydrogen is a national supply chain. And so what we're seeing is a lot more investment coming into producing hydrogen. And so we're in kind of this, in a difficult time where we're balancing supply and demand, but more supply will be coming online and give more resilience going forward. But it's something we're paying very close attention to. Then Michael, it looks like you're back on if you wanted to add anything.
No, I was just going to mention the plant that's going in Nevada. Yeah. Should help a lot with the supply. And there's a study that's going on, just starting with one of the organizations here in California, the Fuel Cell Partnership, and we're going to be taking a look at supply and delivery of liquid hydrogen, since we're going to be needing a lot more volume and mass in the near future.
Right.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you for jumping in there. Sorry about that, everyone. I think So let's see, we'll go to Wayne's question, then I have another one here in the queue. So do you have early views regarding off-ramp from direct public funding? Tyson, yeah, can you please address that?
Yeah, so we do. We're trying to get off the need for public funding as soon as possible. I mean, really, what we're trying to do is get to scale, and what scales the market is private investment. And so I think working closely with stakeholders, we're trying to devise strategies to get there. One of the things we're looking at really closely is, leveraging what we got into statute last year is the Climate Catalyst Fund, which would be, support with financing, but that's just one tool that, we can use to help bring in more private capital. I think the really encouraging thing, though, is there's a lot of private capital coming into the market, both with, as I was just looking last night, California's leading an electric charging station investment. We're doing really well in hydrogen investment. You're seeing some private stations come online. And so it's, I think there's a lot more work to be done.
Great. Okay. From Rebecca Fisher, is an agency tasked with seeking additional funding for California's ZEV incentives? The path to 2035 requires support for our low-income residents, but CCI funding has dried up.
So I should probably answer that too. So just that's really, so that's where the governor's office and legislature, when it comes to funding, it's making sure that those two are, that, the budget, and the legislature, negotiates and approves it. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, all the agencies have roles to play in feeding into that process. So, CARB probably has the best understanding of the vehicle market and what's happening there, especially the funding programs. But what we're trying to do is increase transparency so that everybody sees how these programs are performing, so that we can all advocate, for the funding that's needed to get where we need to go.
Great. Yeah, so we have a question about where can I find a draft?
So we can respond to all the Eventbrite people here if you haven't signed up there, and just with a link we send out. We have probably the easiest thing to do is go to or email us at zev@gobiz.ca.gov if you haven't gotten a draft yet. We have an email list, and that's the main way that it went out.
Yeah. So our email address, again, that goes to our whole team, just to reiterate, is zev@gobiz, GOBIZ.ca.gov. Thank you. It's like magic. I see another question here. So let's see. This is in terms of our metrics. So there's a question here from Janelle London, wondering if you're planning to track gasoline sales volumes as a key metric. More ZEVs don't necessarily translate into gasoline displaced, whereas gasoline sales are a more direct metric. So I don't recall off the top of my head if that metric is in our tables, but maybe Hannah, you could say a little bit more about the metrics, either that one or a little bit more about just the metrics in general and how we thought about them.
Sure. Yeah, and Tyson sort of mentioned this at a high level during his presentation with that metrics chart, but at the end of the draft, you'll notice that there are quite a few pages of proposed metrics for us to track the health of the ZEV market in multiple ways, not just, how many sales of vehicles there may be, but other indicators to look at the 4 pillars that were mentioned. So please take a look at that. Janelle will take this as feedback for us to see if this is possible. I know the Energy Commission tracks some similar outcomes, so we'll take a look at that. I think we have a call with you coming up on this too. So thank you for your question, and we do ask that everyone take a look at those metrics at the end and let us know if you have feedback on that and things that we're missing or ways that we could track this differently.
Great. All right, from Jamie here, CARB and CEC recently released a joint GFO that for the first time combines the resources of both agencies. That was awesome. I think I thank you for raising this, Jamie. How can you expand this collaboration to include Caltrans, CPUC, and other agencies? Great question. Tyson, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I think this is core to what we're trying to do is really align programs across the different agencies so that from an end user perspective or from a project developer perspective, it's simple and straightforward. You're not having to go and align pots of funding in timing and all that type of stuff to pull projects together. And I really commend the leadership of the Energy Commission Air Resources Board for kickstarting this and that project. I think that Jamie, you had a lot to do with. And so really, so when you look at the pillar priorities going forward, just thinking about how to operationalize this is one of the core kind of cross-cutting priority areas that we really want to focus in on. It's simplifying the public funding for one thing, but then also simplifying the bridge from public funding to the private capital markets. And that's really kind of where the financing stuff comes in as well. And so we're doing a lot of work with the iBank to potentially, leverage their expertise to help pull together pots of funding to leverage, and working closely with the Energy Commission, for example, on grant funding for or just funding in general for infrastructure, so we can pull those things together and maximize the value of the public dollar to bring in more private capital.
Great. I see a question that came up a little bit earlier that I'm going to jump over to. What kind of thought has been given to the reliability and resiliency of the hydrogen supply? Great question. Tyson and Michael, maybe you could say a little bit about that. Both of you have probably some comments there.
Yeah, I think this one might be a little bit of repeat from when you, but just to add a little bit more on it, there's a big push on green hydrogen, for example, and the connection between the transportation sector and the energy sector. And I think there's a big open field of work to be done there in terms of connecting the two. But in the short term, we have to weather some storms. In the midterm, you'll start to see more supply come online. And in the longer term, it's, how do we really integrate all these sectors together?
Great. I mean, it's worth repeating, right? That's what I get for jumping off. Bill Zobel, I think this is a comment and a question. So the CHBC, the California Hydrogen Business Council, supports your inclusion of the secondary ZEV market. We have some ideas on how to support and grow this. Would be interested in hearing your thoughts on this? Yeah, we have thought about this, and I open this to the team. I think we've all sort of touched this one and have some thoughts on it.
For sure. So, at the risk of dominating, I'll start this thing, but I think that the secondhand market is a huge opportunity right now, and we're working. It's sustained focus on it, because I think we look at equity and access to this technology. The Clean Cars for All program, for example, has had a great success in getting people into secondhand vehicles, getting out of the old, less reliable vehicles into more reliable vehicles. We're trying to figure out how do we accelerate that, maybe, go statewide with it. I think there's a lot of people here on this webinar, I know, have a lot more experience directly with that. And so I guess the broad thing is, yes, secondhand market, and it is intentionally in the governor's executive order, if you've noticed. And so it's something we just need to do a lot more work on. I'm not sure if Hannah or Kyla, if there's anything you'd add.
Sure, yeah, and I just wanted to point out an interesting data point is that if you look at the CEC's new dashboard on zero-emission vehicle sales, you see that we have north of 700,000 sales of zero-emission vehicles. But if you look at the amount of registered vehicles, the number is lower than that. So it shows that we are leaking zero-emission vehicles in California. We're losing them to other states that potentially have more support for use them. So it shows that this is a problem, and that we need to figure out ways to keep the ZEVs in the state after they're sold.
Yeah, I think you all covered it well. I'd only add that this is an important topic for collaboration among state agencies, as well as, the Air Resources Board and others have funding programs that relate to the used market and to this piece. So we're working closely with them to figure out how to move those forward and keep those vehicles in the state.
So this next question, there was a little bit of a comment that happened before it. So just for the benefit of the group, hello, I see the start of some equity principles in the document, but not much on engaging community members to get specifics about how this equity will actually manifest in communities. So then the question is, is there a plan for including this level of outreach? specifically in the strategy, and particularly to communities that are multilingual or harder to reach. And it also occurs to me that we think about other kinds of communities, maybe not the equity, in terms of equity piece, like the tribes and things like that. I think that occurs to me as well. So,
yeah. So I think as far as a plan goes, so there's a lot of work that's happening at the state through the SB 350, kind of like the barriers work, which is, brought together Energy Commission and CARB, and I think some other agencies as well, but kind of to lead the reports. And so there's ongoing equity discussions going, but it's a tough nut that we have to continue to crack. And so what I would encourage you as a stakeholder, please dig into the strategy, make suggestions for how we can bring that more to the forefront. I mean, the answer is yes, we want to do more. We need to do more. The question is how, and how to do it most effectively. I think there's been a lot of programs where we've learned quite a bit on the ground. I'm trying to help bring that and daylight from what we learned on the ground up to the top level. But I think please do dig in and make suggestions for how we can improve, because that's one of the most important components.
Great. Okay. Jem Kennedy, will the ZEV market development strategy include specific goals such as increase the percentages of ZEVs to 25% by 2025, 80% by 2035, and 100% by 2050, etc.?
So, yeah, it's just to jump in there, it's a great question. I think if you really look to what CARB is doing with the mobile source strategy, is where a lot of those numbers will start to come out. Whether or not they become in statute or in a specific directive remains to be seen. I think we know what the end looks like, and we can kind of draw lines on what those checkpoints are. I think one thing that will start to come out much more aggressively is the infrastructure targets. I think an Energy Commission is working on AB 2127, really with the question of, how many chargers do we need to get to our 2035 goal? And then, on the hydrogen side, we're doing a lot of work there as well. And so, I think it will refine through time. The, question for stakeholders is, do we need interim targets to be specific and prescribed, or is the, set of policies that we have in place, does that cover what's needed? I think in my mind, the 100% target is probably good enough, but with some checkpoints and, waypoints along the way.
Okay. So this is the financing issues are greatly increased in the medium heavy duty. This isn't a question, I think, a statement, but yes, I think we acknowledge that. And so maybe we can just say a little bit about, regarding financing equipment or how we're thinking about some support in terms of not just the executive order, but some of the other regulations that have come through and how to help the transition of that segment of the market. And I think we've got a lot of folks who could answer. Maybe Tyson start, Michael and Hannah, if you want to kind of round out the comments there.
Yeah, I'll hand it to Hannah next, but the financing is a big piece of it. And I think that the beauty of the medium and heavy duty market is if, like on the infrastructure side, if the vehicles are there, the infrastructure is probably financeable. And so then it becomes supporting the vehicles and making sure those get there. But I think, Hannah, I'll kick it. So Lisa, yes, it is something we're laser focused in on, and we need to figure out strategies to bridge the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. We totally recognize that the financial barriers are exacerbated and magnified in the medium heavy duty sector, partly because the vehicles and the infrastructure are more expensive. So one of the things that we just want to briefly mention, and this will become sort of part of the pillar priorities that was discussed, but we're working on what the state's activities and alignment and coordination looks like moving forward in the medium and heavy duty sector. And so we've spoken with a few of you about this, and we're refining what it's called, but it used to be called the Big ZEV Strategy. We'll probably update that name given the ZEV Market Development Strategy so as not to confuse folks. But we're interested in, and Lisa, we can reach out to you to get feedback on ways that the state can be more useful or more efficient in supporting the medium heavy duty market. We've got some work going on that'll continue to be updated, and we'll keep folks posted on that.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe two more questions. So we'll move to Nico's question here. which is how will GO-Biz use its role and expertise to accelerate timelines for private industry, investors, and constitutional investors to implement ZEV fuels production and distribution infrastructure. So a nice softball there for you as we wrap up.
I think, yeah, I think it's keeping everybody together, right? And it's leveraging the groups that we have, help pull stakeholders together. I think in terms of accelerating timelines, I mean, we've been focused on permitting as the most simple answer for quite some time, in that, trying to eliminate a lot of the soft costs associated so that, the dollar invested in California, because that dollar goes to work as soon as possible. I think and then there's a lot of work on interconnection that needs to be done, and the Public Utilities Commission is doing that, in terms of connecting to the grid. And so I think there's, it's really kind of sustained as collective. It's really a collective question, right? And so that's, I think, where GO-Biz has a good strength. I don't know if anybody else would add anything.
Okay, I think we'll do a couple more questions. So to Sarah, the IOUs are mentioned several times in the action plan for their great work on rates and other items. What agency does GO-Biz envision as the lead agency with the POUs?
That's great. I mean, the Energy Commission, the POUs support, send in reports to the Energy Commission. So I think it's the Energy Commission working closely with the Public Utilities Commission. But Hannah, that's probably a good question for you as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. We notice, that the POUs do participate very actively and pay attention to what's going on at the PUC, because that often sort of sends signals for ways that they may consider investing. But the Energy Commission does their IPER process, and then the POUs submit their integrated resource planning. And so throughout that process, we envision a lot of this coming forward, and we're closely engaged with all of these folks to make sure that everyone is sort of on the same page and continuing the innovation that they've already done a lot of in this space to transition the market.
Okay, and from Patrick, are there goals for each of the 4 pillars of the ZEV market development? It would be helpful to understand the ultimate goals and milestones for each and how different players fit into those goals. So Tyson, maybe you're best suited to sort of speak to that question to start off with.
Yeah, so I would encourage you to look at the metrics section, especially the appendix at the bottom. There's a bunch of goals associated with each of these pillars. I think the best defined ones are vehicles and infrastructure, because those are the easiest to put numbers on. Workforce, the general goal is to make sure we have enough workforce and that we're pulling from communities that have been underrepresented. And then the end user is a little bit more difficult to, essentially we just need tools to get to yes. But so I would encourage you to look at that. And if you have any suggestions or if it needs more clarification, please make those suggestions.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think we'll start to wrap up now from there. If anybody has other questions, we're always available. Please do feel free to reach out you can reach out to any one of us on the team if you already know us, or to the ZEV at gobiz.ca.gov. And then in terms of next steps, I think Tyson mentioned this, but if you can please send comments if you have them, ideally, by Friday or by the end of the weekend would be great. So the 4th, and it'd be excellent if you have specific changes to actually make them track changes in the document or add comments to the document specifically where you have feedback. But we're happy to receive them any way that works best for you. The most important is that we get your input. So let us know how we can best help with that. And then otherwise, I just want to say thank you again to Peter and to Ellen and to her team and the Coast to Coast program for helping to make this possible, and to all of you for being here with us today. Thank you.